Hello, fellow Supermom. I'm glad you're here. This is the Special Needs Supermom podcast, the glass of wine for your mind. Your tribe where you can relax, unwind, and get stronger and more confident about your superpowers. I'm Nadine Villier, your host, supermom of an autistic wonderboy and a supergirl battling juvenile arthritis, all while being a military spouse and international entrepreneur. Enjoy your glass of wine. From advocate to educate, and we are both military wives. We have a long history in the military, and that's how we met actually in Fort Leavenworth, in the group that Shelly started there. And it actually is the reason I started my podcast, because I missed my support group in Kansas. We both have special needs kids, and that can be challenging enough. But now throw in the relocation every other year. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode, about, the extra challenges we have. And Shelly has a ton of information on how you can relocate the best possible way and what your rights are. So Shelly, welcome again to my podcast.
Thanks, Nadine. I'm happy to be here.
I love it that you're on the show again. You're such a big resource of information, especially, in our situations when you move around a lot.
Yeah.
And you don't know where you can find help, what you need to do, what your rights are. So I thought, first kind of talk about our struggles first. So like most of you know, I live in the Netherlands, but we move around. So we've been located and we've been living in Kansas for a couple of years, where I met Shelly. And when we moved back to the Netherlands, our struggles was that we had to redo all the tests of our kids again. Now, Pepin, my son, has autism and an ADHD, and he got his real proper test at Kansas University. That's where he got, the labels to say, and the first help, and we had to try different medications, see what works best. And I don't know if it's still the case, but back then you would start with Ritalin because it's, the oldest drug basically, and they have the most knowledge of it. It's also probably the cheapest because it's so old. And then we moved back to the Netherlands, and he had to redo all the tests, had to do the trial and error with medication again, while we knew Ritalin wouldn't work and the follow-up medication wouldn't work. We actually brought home 6 months of medication to the Netherlands to find out that the meds we used in the States were not yet available in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
That was a all new struggle. And for Jika, our daughter with juvenile arthritis, it was a bit different because, you have juvenile arthritis. So in that way, because it's physical, it's easier, I think, for them to handle. They don't have to retest the fact that you have juvenile arthritis, but she also is dyslexic. And despite the fact that the Dutch insurance paid for the testing in the States, we came back to the Netherlands. She had to have a full year of really bad grades for spelling and reading before she was allowed to start to be tested again. And that was another. So it took her at least 2 years again when we came back to the Netherlands. Like, dyslexia is something different overseas.
Wow.
So we had our struggles, just the medical and the getting the right treatment in what you're entitled for. And then we're not even talking about the difference in culture or, the difference in school systems. So how was it for you?
Yeah, well, our first child was late. I would call late diagnosis on the spectrum for the most part. I don't think it's unusual for that diagnosis of what they call Asperger's.
Yeah.
But I think it's often kind of late in that sense, but for us, it was late in comparison to other people and other children that were diagnosed earlier. And so, we knew we were going to move, like right after we knew we were moving. And so we didn't fight in the system at school. We didn't go to the school system. We did tell them, but we didn't go through the whole process, because we would have just ended up, maybe we would have finished the IEP process and then moved again. Right. So when we got to Kansas, that was our first year. It was a struggle. But after really a collection of data on my part, using things that were available to the school that they weren't using, to assess him and to understand the data that existed, by producing data on my own with those tools, we were able to eventually get an IEP. And so we stayed on that IEP, until I think sophomore year in high school. And so, I think the challenge is that even in Kansas, it's a unique situation there, because the school district on the post is the post school district. But there is some requirements when you are a post school district to meet the needs of those military students there. And I think that, it was very difficult getting them on board. It really was a fight. And I just had to learn everything that I could. And that's really where my advocacy grew out of, is because I saw these struggles. I knew the services weren't there. I knew that they were going to get him behind and create more of a gap. And I wanted to close that gap as soon as possible. So I just learned about the regulations. I learned about the disability, and I learned about how to speak to it in the academic setting, because a medical diagnosis versus an academic eligibility for special education is different in the state. So I can have a diagnosis, but doesn't mean that I need special education services. So
no, that's true.
Yeah. So kids, let's use a diabetic, a child with juvenile diabetes, they may not need special instruction, but they would need a 504 or a health plan. They might need accommodations to go and leave the classroom at any time they want and give themselves an injection or check their blood sugar level. And they might also have a health plan, because everybody needs to know if something suddenly occurs, somebody needs to know how to address it, so they can put a health plan in place. So there are those differences between medical versus academic. We can bring medical information to the table and we can share it, private evaluations, and it must be highly considered by the academic team, the school-based team, and the full IEB team and eligibility determination that plays into it. And then we look at all of the information and we make a decision as to whether the child is eligible under what one or multiple disabilities. And then based on that, we start looking at the data, saying, what does the child need? And we write an IEP. So it is challenging. The biggest challenge in the military is, as you well know, is the moving. And in the United States, we have a law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, or people say IDEA sometimes. And in there, it talks about when a student transitions from one state to another, the state can reevaluate the student. They have 90 days to do so, which is the regulation for an evaluation, but they must keep the IEP in place with comparable services.
Okay. So
what that means is, if I have speech and language for 60 minutes a week, and I'm currently getting 2 30-minute sessions, of speech and language, I might get 3 20-minute sessions. But it still has to be comparable. So they basically look at what you're getting, and then they may give you comparable services. The district can also just take your IEP and implement it. They might change we have state standards. And so they might change the state standard so it aligns to their state standard. But they might still provide the service. The catch is always, and I would say most IEPs that come into the state that I'm in with military families that I've worked with, they do not accept the IEP.
And why is that?
Part of it is because of the state standards. So if they came from another state and the goals are not aligned to the standards, they want to align them to the standards. or they just want to make a decision about, is what that last state what we want to do here. Now they're not allowed to talk about funding, but if a child comes from out of state with a one-to-one para, somebody who's with them all day long,
Yeah.
right next to them, that school district might not want, the new school district
No.
might not want to fund that. So they're going to look at the child, evaluate the child, and determine whether or not they still think that's appropriate, whether their school or the way it's set up can provide the need without that one-to-one all day long, or they shouldn't do it based on funding, but they might,
Yeah.
because we don't know what their reasons are.
Yeah.
And that's why a parent really needs to know how to fight for those things at the table and explain why it's super necessary for that child to continue to have that service, that para, that goal, whatever, that they came with from the other school. Now, the thing to remember is that in each state, how you bring that IEP into the state and when they decide to not accept it, give comparable services and reevaluate, is that evaluation considered an initial evaluation or a re-evaluation? So in our state, I've worked with military clients, and the families told me that the school, and when I got involved, the school district said, well, it's a reevaluation. And I said, no, not in our state. If you choose not to accept the IEP from out of state, it is considered then an initial evaluation in the state of Colorado. It cannot be considered a reevaluation. And the reason that that's important is because an initial evaluation requires and means something different than a reevaluation. And one of those things is that the parent must then sign for that initial IEP.
Yeah.
And so, and the parent rights come into place. And, every state has, I'll talk about that in a minute, a set of parent rights. But then the parent can say, no to the services if they are getting pushback, and then they can then go and do a due process complaint or state complaint. Anybody can do that. But I feel like it has a little more importance in that situation when it's an initial. Yeah. So I've had to correct school districts because they thought it was a reevaluation. And I'm like, it can't be a reevaluation because you never evaluated the child in the first place in this state.
No.
So that's how our state implements that. Yeah. So there's so many intricacies that you need to know about. And this is where I think that military establishments, such as the Exceptional Family Members Program, or even the JAG office, or somebody else in the military, doesn't do a good job understanding even what their state requirement is, and then informing those parents when I get an order to come to Colorado, if I got orders to come to Colorado, EFMP should then connect me to EFMP in Colorado, and EFMP in Colorado should tell me, here's what will likely happen with your IEP. It will be an initial evaluation. It's not unusual. It's not saying they're not going to service your child, because they have to comparably service that child when they get here. Yeah. It just means they're going to look at their children through their eyes, through their lens, through their state standards, and then they're going to evaluate and make decisions. You're going to be part of the team, but the team is going to come together and make decisions. Yeah. And I think that if they had a better process in place for EFMP to coordinate one to the other.
Because now they just don't.
No. And they do offer education. They do offer EFMP hires STOMP, which is an acronym for I forget what it stands for. I'm sorry. I can't remember. And I've sat in on the STOMP conferences that they've given.
Yeah. I remember the one in Kansas. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So they're still doing those. Their PAVE, I think, is doing it. PAVE, I think, is the one that actually coordinates it with them. Yeah. It's kind of confusing. But I sat on one a couple of years ago. I sat in on one, and I listened to them speak to the parents. And I thought, you're talking about what you know about your state because you're coming from Florida. Yeah. But you don't know my regs here. And so you give them this information, but they really need this little piece that's specific to their state. And they go, well, this is how it's in my state. I don't know what it's like in your state. And I'm like, well, if you're going to present in Colorado, you probably should know what it's like in Colorado. Yeah. So I would raise my hand and say, by the way, so, in Colorado, I'm like, what? I'm almost like, I offered myself to them and said, hey, if you want me to come in and train families, I'll do it. I'll even do it for free,
Yeah.
because it needs to be important that they understand what's going on in
Yeah.
this state and how to navigate the system here.
So now
So,
it's really, you're getting relocated, and it's really up to the families to, reach out and just figure it all out
yeah.
from the start again.
And the less experience you have in the special education realm and,
Yeah.
and creating and doing an evaluation, creating an IEP, progress monitoring services and goals, then the less you'll be prepared when you move.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't been in it very long, when you're still learning, like your first IEP, and then they move you the next year,
Yeah.
and off you go to some other state, and you barely learning the whole regulation, what your child has the rights to,
Yeah.
right? And then they move you to a new state, and the regulations still exist, but the issue is, how do we implement it, or provide the services in our state? How does the state take on IDEA, and states can even go above and beyond IDEA,
Yeah.
create their own, extra pieces, but they just have to meet IDEA. So for instance, in Maryland, so the IDEA says that a parent should have access to reports and, documents, data, whatever, right? In order to be well informed to participate in a meeting. I'm just shortening that. I mean, the regulation's much bigger. In Maryland, the parents want copies of evaluation reports, and they want parents often in most states, and I encourage it, to ask for that report 5 days ahead of any meeting, whether it be an evaluation meeting, an eligibility meeting, or an IEP meeting, to write an IEP document, right? All of those are part of the IEP process. So the regulation says before an IEP meeting. So I think of evaluation and eligibility as part of that IEP meeting, right? Because we've asked for an individual education plan based on if we're eligible, right?
Yeah.
So in Maryland, they went as far as to make a state regulation about that, saying that documents must be provided to parents 5 days prior. See, but they don't have that in Colorado.
No.
So we have to sometimes kind of nudge those, local education administrations, the LEAs, to give us that report. And I generally can make the argument for that. And then, so that's what I mean by each state. You come from Maryland or Colorado, well, I want that. Well, we don't do that here. So you better have somebody with you, or you better have enough knowledge or, gumption to push for that.
Yeah.
So you can meet that right of being informed and a meaningful participant at an IEP meeting. So those little pieces, are often missing. And if you're going to train somebody and speak to families in a state, they should know all the intricacies of the state.
Yeah.
So those STOMP conferences give you a lot of information, general information on what some of your rights are. But when we get down to the intricacies of a state, those are missing. I feel like.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Yeah, it would be great if, if EF&P just would provide, have this welcome to the new post. This is the basic stuff you need to know to get your kids.
What they generally do is welcome you in.
Yeah.
But depending upon who you're working with, their knowledge level could be very different. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
So they may not, one person that happens to work with you may not have the knowledge of the large coordinator, right?
Yeah.
And I've worked with coordinators in the past that don't know some of the things that I know just because of my training. So I've had them call me and say, hey, this is happening to this parent. What do I do? And I say, do this, or they'll send a parent to me.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I am a paid advocate. In other words, I get paid for what I do. So sometimes parents call me and, I can't sit with them for hours on end and walk them through the process, and they may not have the funds. That's another thing. They may not have the funds to hire an advocate. Yeah. I probably am one of the lowest paid advocates, I would think, in Colorado, but from my understanding of talking to professionals, I'm probably one of the most professional advocates in the state. But I want it to be accessible to as many people as possible. Yeah. Right. So I make that. I also provide military discounts, which, I think is important because I've been military. I've been both enlisted and officer corps. So we know, my husband was, not me, I should correct that. but I lived the life with him. So as far as
Yeah.
I got that.
We have a
But,
saying in the Netherlands that the wife always outranks the husband. So if the
yeah.
wife if the husband has, like in the Netherlands, if you're an officer, you have stars on your shoulder.
Yep.
So the more years and the higher you get more stars. But a wife is always one star above her husband.
Yeah. I think they call them household six here. I think
Oh,
that's the reference. Household six, which I
okay.
think has something to do with like the general of the household, if I'm
Oh
correct.
yeah.
So anyways, what was I saying? I forgot. We were talking about something there.
Oh gee. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, we were talking about. Oh, now I have to rethink it as well. The rights that you're a paid advocate, but
Yeah. So
not
they'll
everybody has
forward
the
them.
fundings. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the EFMP coordinators will send clients to me,
Yeah.
or they'll contact me and ask me for to help
Yeah.
them with something. And I generally will help. I mean, I'm not going to generally turn away military families.
No.
I'm going to try to give them at least a direction to go in, or at least give the coordinator some advice to send them in this direction. What I want to talk about, what I want to transition to here is that in, I think, 2018, the Government Accountability Office did a survey on EFMP and its effectiveness, basically. I'm just going to call it that. And it was lacking. They were not doing their job the way it should be done, or to the expectation that was set by the government. And so there's been a reformulation. And last year in front of Congress, a bunch of women, moms and military, I think maybe some military men as well, they spoke about EFMP, special education, and access and transitions and all the problems, basically trying to bring light to the issues that families are facing, especially families with special needs. And so that has kind of stirred up the pot. And so last, I think March or April, somewhere in the spring of last year during COVID, I sat in, I was a guest speaker for the PEAL clinic, PELE. It's also one of the organizations that helped to train me at the Institute for Special Education Advocacy at William & Mary Law College. And so I went through that training. So they hired me basically to come in as a guest speaker and help the military. So attorneys, paralegals, EFMP coordinators and advisors on special education. So one of the things that I did is I held mock IEP meetings and mock manifestation determination meetings, which are part of the process of, getting an IEP. And so it's basically like a live in-person training. Okay, so here's what's going on. I'm going to be the special education teacher or the SPED coordinator, and I'm going to push back on you. And how are you going to push back on me?
Oh yeah.
And I'm going to say something that's not appropriate, not required. And how are you going to respond to me? This is after they would go through all the training, right? The week-long training, which was interesting because it was all remote, virtual, but nonetheless, it was information. And so what's going on from this told me something, is that they are now engaging with their JAG Corps, so their attorneys, the EFMP coordinator, and paras, paraprofessionals in JAG Corps, right? With the idea that they can sit in on IEP meetings, based on how problematic. I think they'll let this happen because they won't be able to service all of them. But if there are a lot of problems going on, then they can come in, and I understand, just sit in on the meeting and listen. I don't know if they're going to be allowed to speak yet and actively engage on behalf of the parent and the child in this process, but they're moving towards that.
That's awesome, because every parent, we had you, but every parent, especially if you're at the start of the process, but even if you're, relocated already a few times, and, every state, new regulations, or every country, new things going on.
Oh, yeah.
In the Netherlands, we're a fifth of the size of Kansas, but we have 17 million people here. And actually in a city, it can change from school to school sometimes,
Yeah.
so
Same here.
it's so important that you have somebody with you that maybe they're not even, like you said, not allowed to speak yet, but after the meeting, uh, they will first prevent you from signing off something right away during the meeting, because that you should never do. You should always come home first,
Yes.
rethink everything, reprocess everything. And, if you have somebody with you, an extra pair of ears that's not directly related, it helps if you have a little bit of a distance, so no emotional attachment with that. Help you reevaluate. Yeah.
Don't sign that document.
No.
Even if I'm in the room, I don't
No.
let them sign it, because here's the thing. I want them to send me, we've talked about a lot of things, so I want them to make changes. And then I want them to send it to us, and we're going to both read through it.
Yes.
And then we're going to discuss if anything's missing or if it isn't clear, because I want it always to be clear to both parents. Because if they have to monitor that progress and they have to understand what's happening in the school setting, then they should stranger test it. They call it the stranger test. My husband calls it the Napoleon's corporal test. So I guess Napoleon, I guess I'm not in the military, and I did not go to Sam's. But
even in, so I mean, I'm a communication specialist. Even in communications, we have a saying that, if your kid doesn't understand it, rewrite your texts, because, even your kid should understand whatever the topic is, even if it's, science or whatever.
Yes, and that's Napoleon supposedly went out, if he had a plan, gave it to corporal. If they couldn't instigate it, or couldn't get it started, or didn't understand it, it wasn't well written. Let's go back and redo the plan. So it's the same thing. And my husband said that in an IEP meeting one time, and I was like, oh, where'd that come from? Hello? Usually he's pretty quiet, but he didn't understand it, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he gave him that example, and he said, you need to speak to me, because she gets it, but I'm still part of this meeting. And so, and also families who were military, now, especially with all the virtual that we've done this year, if a husband's downrange or he's a TDY, then command and the school district need to allow for him to attend. Something they should be doing, because the dad is part of that team too. And he may have some input that's important, how he sees his child, what he would like, what he think might be missing. Mom might be overwhelmed and stressed trying to care for these kids by herself. She might just want to get through the process and move on, right? And so dad sometimes can come in and look at it from a different perspective. So I think that's important.
That's really important. I think also, I would almost want to pause this at the moment, saying, this is really a tip for moms. So we military wives, we're used to doing it all by ourselves all the time. But if your husband is entitled and entitled, he should be there with important meetings. And even if it's just virtual, if we go to the hospital with our daughter at the moment, I just have him on speakerphone on really important meetings, if we have to change meds or anything. But for a long time, because Remco has been almost home now for over a year. Well, he's still working, but because he's in active duty, but not, out on the field. So he's working for the ministry at the moment, Ministry of Defense. So they have to give the good example. So everybody's working from home. So for the first time in over 20 years, I've got my husband at home all the time. And then you realize how much you do and decide and not tell to your husband. Because, I'm really used to doing it all by myself, and he's never there, or he's in the field. I can't reach him, or he's deployed. And I remember one time I was in the process of changing Wonder Boy's medication. But I was at step 10, and I realized at a certain moment, he was like, are we going to change his meds? And I'm like, didn't you? Okay, wait, what? So because I'm so used to doing it all by myself and just going, and especially if they're deployed. But if it's possible, they are entitled to be part of meetings.
Yeah.
And if it's possible, they really should be part of those meetings and those processes. Because yes, of course, we moms or maybe husbands have to do it all by ourselves most of the time, but we have to bring our spouse along the way.
Well, it's not only just that we should include them as much as possible, but it's their right as a parent
Yeah,
to participate. So imagine if they were divorced, but both of them had a legal right. It's the
yeah,
same.
it's the
Both
same. Yeah,
because unless the dad has delegated that right to the mom to make all the decisions in the education realm by their divorce or whatever, the dad would have that right to sit at the table. Because they're married, it doesn't take away his right.
No.
He still should and has the right to say yes or no, or give his own input. And I think it's good to have both. I sometimes I think parent moms don't mind doing it because the dads are in the military, often deployed or working long hours or TDY, and they are not the ones engaged with instructing the child at home.
No.
So the mom feels like, yeah, he probably doesn't really know, what the kid needs as much as I do, because I spend more time with the child. But it's still important for him to understand what's happening for his child. So it's important for him to be part of that process. And I think that often is lacking, because it's easy to delegate it off, because they're busy, because they do have demands on them. But so I think that there's a lot of movement happening in the military with family readiness. It's really under family readiness, and there is a reform proposal on family readiness that is kind of part of what was once called the Promise Act, or is maybe still called the Promise Act. I'm not really sure where they're at with that, which was part of a group of women who had concerns about provision of special education and education as a whole for students in the military, underserved population. And one of the things they're working on is really, do we just provide an attorney? One of the things in the Promise Act is really providing an attorney at each post that is dedicated to special education. So a special education at each post that is dedicated to special education. Now that might take a while to get to, but it's a great resource to be adding to the EFMP profile, right? And then just standardizing the services across EFMP, so for enrollment and transfers and access and respite care, things like that, ensuring full service and BAH for GEO bachelors. So if your husband wants to move forward with a placement, but it maybe isn't going to be good for the child or the family, then fully funding for that BAH for a GEO bachelor so that they can stay currently where they're at, the family with the child. And get the services. And then they want to centralize and coordinate EFMP offices, so everybody's coordinated together. And, also gives, I think, support for childcare under EFMP, and possibly, I think, under non-EFMP, just need for childcare for families who have shift work. So if it's a single mom, and she's working night shift, she's going to need someone to care for her child. So providing the funding for that, because that's probably going to be more expensive than daycare. If you're doing the night care as well as for funding. So, that's definitely something that there are movements happening in special education, EFMP provision through the government. And so they're working on, updating that and getting that going.
That actually sounds great, things that you mentioned, that an advocate on every post, that would be, or can be so helpful, if you have one person that just knows it all, knows the regulations, know where to go to. And that would be really my going to another question, is that, okay, at the moment, that's not the case everywhere, that, there's this one person that knows it all. What helps making the transition, as smooth as possible, going to
Sure.
another state, going to another school, what would, no matter if it's just a kid with a physical or a mental challenge,
Mhm.
what would you recommend? Just, talking about getting the best care in the next state, next location where you're at.
I think the best thing to do is, whether your EFMP offices are doing a good job at coordinating or not, is to do a lot of research. So if they say to you, sometimes we get offers like, you can give us your top 3, 5, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So before your husband has to put that in, have a conversation. So if he says, I'm getting ready to put in my 3 or 5 choices for wherever I want to go for my next duty station, let's sit down, or mom, you do it, whatever, and look and see what services that our student needs, not just in education, but also medically, ABA services, things like that. What is available and how long is the wait list?
Yeah.
Because I know you can, if you have a child who's on the spectrum, you can, if you're coming to Colorado, there's a lot of providers, but I know a lot of parents who are on waiting lists.
Okay.
And so just because there's a lot of providers doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get services in a reasonable time frame. And that's not something that EFMP can change. That's
No.
about the number of providers that are available.
Yeah.
And so you have to do your research. You have to look into what school district does a good job. There's a lots of stuff at state level, at the State Department of Education, that says how a school district is doing in meeting the standards for students who have disabilities. That's one of the things we track. Okay. I'm on a state committee, the Colorado Special Education Advisory Committee for the state, where we look at items in special education and advise the Board of Education on issues concerning or unmet needs of students with disabilities, right? It crossed our state.
Yeah.
So one of the indicators we look at is special education, progress. If a school district is doing a good job at meeting the standards for students who have IEPs. So you can look up a school district and see how they're doing. You can connect with, so like at Fort Leavenworth, my parent support group still exists on Facebook. Yeah. And you can ask to join. You have to answer the 30 questions at least. And I might look a little into you to see where, if you're actually military, because I try to protect the community that it's only military families. Yeah. But you can connect there and start asking, how hard is it to get ABA services? Where's the best doctor? Who would you recommend? And then call those people and ask them what their wait list looks like.
The group in Leavenworth, because I'm still part of it, you see a lot of questions like that, and there's a lot of support.
Yes. And that's the whole purpose of that group, was to provide a soft place for parents to come and talk about their struggles and not be judged, and to be supported, and to get access to resources. What worked good for you? And also what doctor is good for you, but also what worked good for you? What have you tried with your child who has Down syndrome or autism or whatever? And what worked in your home? I'd like to have some ideas about what I could try in my own home to help my child. How did you set up I have lots of things that I provide parents through my kind of in-home service stuff, helping parents find what works in their home. But that is a great resource. So getting connected. There's a group called AMFAS on AMFAS. I admin one of their groups here just because I know the guy who set it up, and they needed somebody to help admin here. And so that's another thing you can ask to join. They're usually at most military posts. There's a Facebook group, and they're another great place to get resources. But you need to call, because somebody might tell you this person's great, or they're available, or we got in really easy. But you need to call, and don't just rely on one person. Do your research. That's huge. Coordinate with your EFMP. I know they don't always get everything right, or it could depend on which person you get, but at least make an attempt, because you might at Leavenworth, Jennifer Burford. She retired recently, but she was awesome. She was knowledgeable. The Army I don't know if they still can, but their coordinators could go to IEP meetings. She just couldn't go to all of them. It was not possible. And so I actually started going with some parents just to help them navigate, because I understood the process. But they are a good resource. If they're knowledgeable, they're a good resource. Here, the one at Peterson's really good. The one at Carson, I think, is still the same person. So they probably have a good knowledge base. So get connected there.
Yeah.
Find out about your housing, look up your school districts, research how well they do with special education and meeting the standards and needs of their students. Ask those parents. Don't always rely on parent comments on Facebook about a school is bad and a school is good, because you will get equal comments. That school sucks and that school's great. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Some parents call me and ask me what I think.
Yeah. And, and also with schools, it can change a lot because, and even, within a year, but of course also after 10 years, because people change, a new principal, a new supporting school. It can make a lot of difference. We had it.
You can look up the data in Colorado on special education at a district level.
Yeah.
Some things at school level. So you can look at a building. Some information is building based at that school. And some of it is just based on the district. And you're right. We can get a new superintendent. We can get a new special education director. Transitioning from one administrator to a new one takes a while for their changes to actually get into place. Right. And then when you pick a school, when you pick a couple of schools or a couple of districts, go to their special education page and start looking up if they have guidelines for what they do, like their special education manual or handbook.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Some just use the state. One of the districts here just said, well, we just adopt the state one. So I just send parents straight to that. Go to the state guidance handbook. And that's what your school is going to hold itself to. Yeah. So follow that.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good way to understand the educational piece. Here's the thing, you may come into a district that's rated really well, a school that looks great, it's also rated really well, or parents talk very highly of it, or their programming is great, or they have what you want or need. And you may get a group of your team, the people that are school-based side of your team, they may not be great. Your case manager may be horrible.
Yeah.
But everybody else on the team is great. But the person who's driving everything is horrible. No planning. No, I worked with a client this year that the case manager, I never heard so many misguided things come out of that person's mouth ever. It was just shocking to me. And it was taking the district forever to correct the problems. So it created a lot of problems throughout almost the entire year until, the person just didn't come back. Finally, that person was not there anymore. But see, that can make a big difference.
Yes.
And then how you approach it as a parent is really important. Firm, respectful, civil, ask your questions. I don't go in as like, I'm just going to get you. That's not kind of advocate I am. I'm trying to solve a problem at the table. And the reason that it's important to have somebody on your team, whether it be a knowledgeable friend or EFMP, or even if it moves to the legal side, is that they're a team player. Yeah. Because schools, they have programs and ways they do things, districts and schools, and you want to work within their boundaries. Yeah. But you want to be able to get what your child needs. And so you need to be a team player, and you need to work with the school and the team, even when they're not great. You need to find a way to work with them. Yes. And that's one of the things that I try to do when we run into problems, is solve the problem at the table, because otherwise you have remedy. Here's your remedies. Your remedies are state complaint or due process complaint, right? Yes. And mediation that has a part in that due process complaint. And I'll tell you what I know from most of the states we've worked in, most parents will lose those due process complaints and state complaints.
Oh, wow.
For one of two reasons, I think.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to write a good state complaint or make a good due process complaint, or it just doesn't go in their favor. No. And we had a big mess up here in Colorado a while back, where somebody who was working at the state was finding for parents, and the State Department of Education was reversing the decision. Yeah. And so it's just really hard to win. So, and when you do it, you're going to stay put your child. Child's going to stay with the stuff and then where they are. but it's going to take you a while. It's going to take you a process, right? State complaint has a certain time frame, due process has a certain time frame.
Yeah.
But during all that time, and if you don't do it right away and you decide, you have like a year to file a state complaint after there was a problem. If you wait that long, your child goes without services, or if you're just hoping they're going to fix themselves and 6 months later they still haven't, and then you've lost all that time.
Yes.
So it's much more effective for your child to get what they need when we can solve the problem at the table, when we can get to yes, right? It's a give and take. I talk with parents all the time, like, what are your top 5 items?
Yeah.
I might have 10, but we need to narrow them down to the 5. What can you lose? Or if there's 5, and I say, what 3 are super important right now? Because sometimes parents are asking for things. I know there's cases, I've worked with families where it's a mess. And it's because when I come in, they're asking for something that they can't even have. They don't have the data to support that. And they're fighting and fighting and fighting. And the district is saying, no, he doesn't need that service. And I have to come in and say to a family, there is 0 data here to support for what you're asking for.
Yeah.
So you're asking for something that's unattainable unless we ask for more data, which sometimes I've done, and then we can prove that. So that is complex. So in cases where families get all worked up and then they pull in, maybe they pull in someone from the husband's command, or the district does, or things like that start happening. It's generally because what I've seen is because the family side is asking for or doesn't understand the regulation and how it's implemented, or they're asking for something that there's no data to support. So sometimes part of my job is, you just can't do that.
Yeah. And and it's too bad, because maybe as a mom or as a dad, you're dealing with your kids the whole day, and what your kid needs, or you think this would really be helpful. The problem is, as long as you don't have data for it, I understand that you want it and need it, but as long as there's no data, and that's the same in the Netherlands or the same in Germany, if there's no data,
data drives all the decision making in an IEP process. So when you group, here's the thing too. Here's a good clue for parents. When you get sent to a new state and they want to reevaluate that child to get an IEP in that state, be very cautious and attentive to what they are evaluating for. So if you suspect that they could produce data to support speech and language, then you better ask for a comprehensive speech and language evaluation, and you better be clear about what you're looking for. I think my child has dyslexia. Ask them, what assessments do you have at your school building or in your district that you can use to determine whether or not our child has phonological processing deficit, right? So we can use things like, regular achievement assessments that show us that in reading, they're not quite meeting. We have the GORT, we have the CTOP, we have a lot of different tests that target dyslexia, and most schools have them. So you ask for those, and you make sure that the evaluation is comprehensive. Here's the reg, comprehensive, to detect and to assess any suspected disability. So when you tell them, I suspect there's this, or I suspect it's autism, or I suspect it's whatever, they need to assess comprehensively. So that evaluation to come into a new state, when you're transferred and they say, we're going to reevaluate, or we're going to initially evaluate in this state, you better be very careful about that prior written notice and consent to evaluate, and make sure that it is comprehensive in all areas of suspected disability to give you all the data that you need to argue for what you want.
And I wanted to go back a little, because I think you just said something really important, because what I've heard before is that, you go to a new state and they say, well, we're going to reevaluate this IEP from the other state. But I think I heard you say you can't reevaluate the IEP from another state, right? They have to do they have to do a new one for that state. Am I
Yeah, so
right there?
they can look at the so sometimes school districts will say, "We're fine." They'll
Yeah,
look at you'll get the IEP and you'll probably send I would send the eligibility report, the
yeah,
evaluation report and the eligibility determination
yeah,
and the IEP. And a good school district will look at it and say, well, maybe they'll say, "Oh, you know what? This is pretty darn comprehensive. And, I think it's good data and it speaks to it, and we're okay with that.
yeah,
We've talked to the parents. They are in agreement with this. We think we can service this. We might just write an IEP in our state with our state, requirements for
yeah.
our standards into the IEP, but we're going to take it all on."
Okay.
If they say no, then in our state, it's called an initial evaluation.
Ah,
I don't know what it is in the state of Iowa.
yeah,
I don't know. They might call it a reevaluation. Each state could be different. So you would want to look at that. And your state Department of Education is another place you should go to look up how their regulation
yeah,
that speaks to IDEA. And you can go to their thing and search student transferring from another state.
yeah,
And it should give you any documents or any regulations or anything else that speaks to that. And that's how when we came here, I found that it's an initial because their regulation says at 4.25 or whatever it is. I don't know. It's 400 something, but I'm 4 point something, but I don't know exactly what it says. A student transferring from a different state, it is an initial evaluation.
yeah,
That's what they do. But I don't know what your state is. So again, these are all the things that parents need to know that
yeah,
they don't even know to look for,
yeah,
Nadine. They don't even know that it could be different
yeah.
because nobody's telling them. So that's when I get involved because here's this parent going, "Why? They're refusing my IEP." And I go, "Oh, not kind of, but no.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
explain it to you."
Yeah, because that's what I understood from you as well. They don't have to provide exactly,
Yeah,
the help that the other state is. Like a 60-minute therapy, they can offer kind of the same. Like
comparable.
you might get 3 times 20 minutes, like you said,
Yeah,
and that's acceptable because uh,
yeah.
it's kind of the same. The problem gets, of course, when you're having this IP and you say, this is what my kid needs, and the school says, well, we think differently.
And that happens
And so,
all the time.
yeah. But like Shelly said, check your resources because there are a lot of resources, but especially when, there's a lot, there's so much to prepare, there's so much to read, and it can be a lot to handle. Uh, you know, I'm always
What I
amazed.
want to say to parents, Nadine, is I've been in your shoes.
Yeah,
My husband is now retired, so that's a thing to think, but he's, 20 years retired. So I've sat in your shoes. I've walked in your shoes, right? Unlike a lot of the teachers at the table and the school-based team who probably are not military, a good portion of them, they haven't walked in your shoes. They'd have to walk. The only way they can walk in your shoes is if they're military and they have a child with special needs.
yes,
That's the only way they walk in your shoes.
yeah,
I've walked in those shoes. I work with families every day that are in those shoes, right? And so I understand. I just want to say I understand personally and internally the struggle, the challenge, the frustration, the
yeah,
exhaustion, um, the confusion, the lack of knowledge, not because you're not able to know, but
yeah.
because you don't even really know where to look.
No,
And so I would say just stick with it. Give yourself grace, give yourself a break when you need one.
yes,
And if you need a resource, go get them.
yeah,
The states do have parent training centers that are free. That's another mandate that comes through IDEA. There's state parent training. Now, they can't go with you to an IEP meeting, but you can take free online courses
yeah,
or, now they're giving virtual courses. They used to do them
yeah.
in person as
But they
well.
can they can be wonderful because first of all, you learn you can really learn new, well, I would say tricks, but learn new ways to help your kids. But what I found when I did those courses, I went like, oh, I'm not the only one. Oh, they're facing the same thing. Oh, because sometimes you really doubt yourself, especially when you, you have family members saying, "Oh, you should just be more firm," and you're like, "Well, that's not really the problem here." But
Yes.
check those free resources. And I wanted to just say to the listeners that in the show notes, Shelly will give me links that you can use and check. And if it's still too much and you need help, and going to an IEP meeting is overwhelming, you need somebody. There are advocates like Shelly, and sometimes the EFMP can help out. But don't be afraid or ashamed to use them, because you've been around for a long time, and no more than somebody who just started out, or because you know a lot about regulations, you can really help people. So ladies, use those resources, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do it all by yourself. And
Exactly.
I had a few readers' questions, because we can do, like, I think a year full of shows just talking about this. But I had a few
Just pick
readers.
one topic and do an hour, and
Yeah.
another topic and do another hour. Yeah, because you were talking about something earlier that made me think about. That's another awesome topic to cover for military families. So yeah, absolutely.
We will come back in a few months' time. No, I had a few readers' questions. And one was, should you hide the special needs of your kids to prevent, job or expat opportunities?
No.
Be-
My
because,
answer is no. And let me tell you why. You know, first of all, there should be no ramification for your husband.
No.
They should be working with you. We never hid it. I fought for it openly. I established family support groups openly on the basis we were in. So and it never affected us at all. It didn't keep us from going places. There might be times where you may not be able to go overseas, but as for your husband's career, they should always be able to put him into the proper placement to advance his career.
Yeah.
If he's doing well, then he's an asset to the military. And he needs to communicate that if he feels that they're holding him back.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think it's, in my experience and the people that I've worked with, I haven't seen people's careers be ruined or not advanced because they have child with disabilities. I think it's appropriate for them to give parent and family the services they need in a proper placement and create that advancement for the soldier or the officer, whoever, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I say no. I don't know why anybody would want to hide their child's disability, because it doesn't give them access to the services. And if they're not using free services through TRICARE that are hooked up through EFMP, it's going to come out of your pocket.
Yeah. And also,
and in the end, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think some of them might be afraid that, well, we might not be able to be sent abroad or remote, but there's also a reason, especially if your kid needs medical attention. It's the same while, Supergirl always wanted to go to join the military, but she, of course, had to give that dream up because of juvenile arthritis.
Sure.
And she might get a civilian job in the military. She doesn't want that because she doesn't want a desk job. But Remco, my husband, also explained to her the reason is also, if you get deployed, you need to have access to your meds, or need to be able to get your meds or be able to go to a hospital if needed. And especially if you get deployed, that might be hard. But even for being relocated abroad, it might be different if you're in a really remote location, but Western Europe, for instance, but I'm pretty sure also Japan or South Korea, the medical services are great there as well. It
I
might
would
be
just
a
ask
little
the
bit more
parent.
challenging because, you have to figure out your way in that system, but the services
I
are
would
there.
ask a parent. So my comment to that would
Yeah,
be I would say to a parent, okay, so you don't tell the government that, or whatever service you're in,
yeah,
that your child has an exceptional need and they need special care. And so you didn't go to EFMP, so they don't know. They sent you someplace, and you get there, and there's a crisis situation with your child, and there are no services to help you with that.
yeah,
So that is the reason that they have EFMP. It's supposed to, the medical side of EFMP, it's supposed to put you in places that your child can get the services they need,
yeah,
whether medical, what ABA, whatever it is, you know. And so I wouldn't hold back on that.
yeah,
There are lots of installations where your husband can go and serve in his rank at the job that he needs. And I know it's great to think about going overseas. I've been there. I lived
yeah,
in Germany for 3 years, and it was nice. And we didn't have the diagnosis that came after, but we were
yeah.
seeing issues, right? And I knew friends that had those diagnoses who said to me, "I think that might be the problem here." Um, so,
Yeah,
uh, but they were struggling to get some of the stuff that they needed, and so just think about, put your child first.
yeah,
I'm sure your husband loves your child just as much as you do. So put the child first in this situation. The military um, cannot, what's the word? I don't know. They can't hold you back on purpose because your child, that's
no,
discrimination.
yeah,
It's literally discrimination. So they shouldn't be discriminating against you because the child has a disability, because then we're discriminating against somebody who has a disability.
yeah.
That's a no. There's all kinds of laws that protect that. So, I would say don't hold it back.
Okay. And the other question was that, there are really two questions. What if, go to a new state and it really goes wrong, between you and, for instance, the school? You come in with an IEP and they don't want to meet it, or they want let's just say it really backfires. The whole, you have big arguments. You have to bring in, like you said before, your commander. They bring in a school district or whatever. What should you do? What are your rights?
So every state has, and IDEA requires this, every state has a set of parent rights. So you should be given those and ask for an evaluation. You should be given them when you come into the new state and you have your first meeting about your IEP with that state. So ask for your parental rights. They're generally the same across
Yeah,
every state, which is, I have a right to participate, I have a right to be heard, blah, 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 blah. And then I have the right to due process and state complaint. And each state has a different requirement of how long, once like if you know that they violated something,
yeah,
right? They violated IDA, they violated FAPE. You have like a year or 2 years, depending upon your state, once you find out about that
yeah,
issue, to file a state complaint or due process or anything like that. So you need to look into that too. But you always have state complaint and due process to use as your rights. I would say it's time I would say try bringing in an advocate or an attorney.
yeah,
If you have a really good advocate who's not always trying to trip up the other side and who really wants to solve a problem for you, that's probably the avenue to go, because it'll be far less expensive.
yeah,
And show them what's going on. And hopefully they can come in as almost like a mediator,
yeah,
come in and be a problem solver and say, okay, here, and they'll advise you. You're asking for something you can't get. Like that's a good advocate that says, hey, you don't have data for this, if that's the case. And if not, they can go to the district and say, hey, explain to me why you're fighting this,
yeah,
and then we get to a give and take and a problem solving. And sometimes it's really miscommunication, Nadine. I see that all the time. The parents understood them to mean one thing. And when I come in, I'm like, oh, So you didn't do a really good job communicating that to the family, because
Yeah.
this is how they perceive that. And that is why you're having problems. And let's go
Yeah.
back to, let's reset. I call it a reset. We need to reset here. And we need to go back to the start and work our way through this process. That would be my recommendation, because
Okay.
as long as if you're asking for things you can have and you're within the regulations and they're not following them, then if you can't solve it at the table, then you're going to have to use one of the two bigs: the state complaint, write a good one, and go through due process and mediation. And there are lots of things around that we don't have time to discuss. But if you do due process, I would say some advocates will go with you to due process. I prefer an attorney to be at your side, because the school district's going to have their attorney.
Yeah.
And so that requires interpretation of the law and the provision of FAPE. And I think that an attorney is the only one who can interpret the law. I can't interpret the law. I'm an advocate.
Yeah.
I'm a non-attorney advocate. So.
Okay. Well, that were the questions I had. Is there anything, you think we missed, or you want to, a tip you want to give?
I think the biggest tip is the research, and learning about what the new state's requirements are.
Yeah.
Giving yourself grace, asking for clarification when you go to the new state. If something seems off to you, or you don't understand why they're saying no to something, ask for clarification. And, try the free resources first. There's things like the ARC that have free advocates. The problem is, what I generally see with the ARC is they can't take on any more cases. They're pretty over full, really. Use your parent training centers to learn as much as you can. It's called Peak Parent in Colorado. Every state is different. So use that parent training center. And then, at the least, when you're in a meeting and you're overwhelmed, bring a friend, somebody you trust, who can at least just sit, take notes, take in everything, and maybe they're not even talking. They're just keeping track of everything. Ask to record meetings, because especially if your husband can't be there, right?
Yes.
I ask to record meetings most of the time. If I have a really good team and I've worked with them long enough and I trust them, I don't generally, if I think it's going bad, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to record. I'm going to turn my recorder on. Or virtually, can you please record the meeting? Because they can record the audio and the video. So that's a really good thing. Keep really good notes. Keep track of data at home.
Yes.
And here's another thing. I tell parents all the time to keep a notebook.
Yes.
And whenever they run into a problem with the school district, in pen, write the date, what happened, the time, if there was any resolve, if you wrote an email, when you wrote the email, what date and time you sent the email.
The person's involved,
because pen cannot be erased.
No.
And it cannot be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, you could cross out, but then that's gonna lead to questioning. So if you do cross out, write why you crossed something out. Like, I misspelled it, or this wasn't the word I wanted to use. I meant to use this word. Be clear, because that can be part of the data too. Or if you need to go to due process or state complaint, you're going to go back to the things and you can tell them every single detail. As you kept track of it.
And especially because it's in pen, and if you have this notebook, or in my case, a gazillion notebooks, it looks reliable, because you see the different ink, you see the different date, you see that the paper got, old and there's a coffee stain on it. And a digital document, if you have a hard case, they can say, well, you say that you've tracked it, but maybe you made it up. And paper, really can help. And that would be my tip.
Get everything in writing too. If the school district is talking to you, or you're having issues, try to keep it to email. And you need to be civil and clear and respectful in your emails, but firm. And get them to write you back an email. What I get a lot of times when there's an issue is they just want to keep calling the parent. And I will literally tell parents to either not answer the phone, or answer the phone and say, I sent you an email on that. I appreciate if you could reply by email. I'm very busy. I can't spend a lot of time on the phone. I'm trying to take care of my kids, whatever. Get the response in writing, because it's, again, another documented piece of information that you can use down the road. And if you're in the car and you answer the phone and you get a call and it's like, this is the principal, we need you to come pick up your kid, blah, 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 or I'm having this issue, or your kid's doing this, or I'm your teacher and he's not doing his homework, or whatever it is, keep a little tiny notebook, and with like one of those little small ones that has the pen attached, in your purse or in the divider in your car.
Yeah.
I like it in your purse because if you get out and you're in the store and they call you and you're just like, I'm trying to buy stuff, right? You could tell them to call you back or send you an email. But if they continue on, I need to talk to you, you have a pen and you can document that and keep that separate too, because it's good to have that. And it also refreshes your memory and lets you remember what conversations you had in stressful moments as well. So just hang in there. It's hard. See, you can find an advocate at, there's a thing called Yellow Pages for Kids. And you can look it up and you can find an advocate in your area. I'm registered with that. And also COPA, which is COPAA. You can do that, copa.org, I think, or com. I'm not sure which one it is, but I'm also listed there. You can search for advocates through COPA. And some are COPA trained, some, I think if you're in COPA, you're either a member of COPA or at least COPA trained. That means we pay to be members. I'm a trained advocate through ISEA, Institute for Special Education Advocacy. And so you can, I think they tie into the Yellow Pages for Kids. But look and ask your advocate, are they trained? How long have they been doing it? What's their approach? Make sure they're a good fit for you. I even make sure clients are a good fit for me, because I want the client to work with me. They have hired me to advise them. If I'm going to advise them and they're not going to take my advice, I mean, we can have a conversation, but if it gets to the point where you're like, well, no, I don't, then I'm going to say, okay, well, we might not be a good fit for each other. So I try to let them know how I work ahead of time so that they can make an informed decision as well. So,
and one last comment about the paper. If you're traveling and relocating, have the most important documents with you, and never ever in a box somewhere, or even in the luggage that's not the carry-on luggage if you're flying, because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people who can share stories about boxes being lost, and you don't want the box being lost with all your paperwork.
It's buried, Nadine. Like, that you get in your house and you go like, I'm going to the kitchen stuff first because I need to feed my family. I'm going to open the kitchen boxes first, right? And let's say that was in your office box, or I don't know, your basement box. That's the last thing that's going to get opened probably. So,
or not even until the next time.
Hold on just a second. The binders. Keep a binder. Every parent should keep an IEP binder. EFMP has them. They also probably have like some information about how to do it. I try, if my clients need them. A lot of my clients are already doing it anyways. But sometimes I tell clients it's really important to have that binder. Even whether it's EFMP or not, it's just having a special education binder that breaks things up into evaluations, into eligibility documents, into IEPs, into data collection, into progress monitoring, into grades. You have a whole binder. My kids had a binder for every year. And I do the same thing with the 504. I keep a binder of a copy of it, the evaluation that went with it. Keep your private evaluations in there in a separate place than your school evaluations. You're going to keep it organized, and then just start it over the next year with your IEP from the last year. Make a copy of it, put it in there, because you're going to have an IEP meeting for your annual meeting to update your IEP. And there's the old one in there, and it's in the new binder, and you just take the new binder because the old one's probably big and heavy by now.
It's actually a really good tip, because the times that I had this huge binder with me with all the data.
So I think the purpose was for us to kind of talk about and give information to military families about how to transition easily. I hope that was good. I mean, you and I, Nadine, know each other and known each other for a while. So we start talking, and we can keep adding to the content. But I think in the end, it's really preparation, research, a team effort at the table, and understanding what the process is when you move into a new state. And if you need an advocate in your new state, look up one, a reputable one. I'm in Colorado, so if anybody in Colorado needs an advocate, you can find me at advocatetoeducate.com. And it's spelled, the number 2 is spelled out like the number 2, TWO.
Yeah.
And you'll probably find me under most of the listings as advocate, the actual number 2 educate, because that's really how I'm listed as a business, is advocate number 2 educate LLC in Colorado. So,
well, thank you for all your information.
Yeah,
girls, look her up if you need help. You can find me on Special Needs Supermom, of course, and do check out my latest digital product that will help moms as well. I made the Special Needs Supermom planner because I was overwhelmed, had no time. I just made a photo the other day. I've got like 10 notebooks, one for my daughter, one for my son, one for this aspect, one for that, and just going to the hospital with all these things. So I thought what I really need is one planner with, the health tracker, where I can put down my notes, all the great info I get or tips I get. So do check it out. If you have any questions for Shelly or me, reply to this podcast, leave a review, let us know. And if you have certain questions you think are really important, check out the Special Needs Support Group from Fort Leavenworth. Oh, what was the name again? I look it up all the time, but
it's called Fort Leavenworth Parents of Special Needs.
Yes. So, you can find us there, or check out this Facebook page of Shelly or my Facebook page, Special Needs Supermom. And leave a question there. And, if there are certain questions we think, we could really do a follow-up on that, you will hear Shelly and me talk about military life and special needs kids in a couple of months again. I'm pretty sure we can talk for hours on the subject.
And you can find me on social media at Advocate to Educate.
Yeah.
It's at Facebook and Instagram. And so you can connect to me there. You can also send me a message through my through my website.
We will listen our resources in the show notes, so you can look it all up, and we will add some resources that Shelly mentioned here in the show. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me again, and thanks for everything you're doing with your podcast. And I really love your digital planner. So that's a great thing for parents, for resources. I still use a paper planner, and I think they're great because we get used to hearing the dings on our phone, and we just kind of, after a while, our brain just goes, ugh, and we just wipe it off the page, and then we forget to do something. So
I turned off the pinks.
Yeah, I use it. So it's a great planner. I've actually looked it all over from start to finish. So
yes.
It's awesome. So
thank you
for having me, and all you military moms, hang in there, or dads, hang in there, and you're going to get through. So blessings to you all.
Okay, well, thank you. This was today's episode of the Special Needs Supermom podcast. Enjoyed your mental glass of wine? If so, please subscribe, rate and review the show, and recommend the podcast to other Special Needs Supermoms could use that mental glass of wine as well. Until next time, fellow Supermoms. Cheers, Nadine.